So now let's move on to better things. If we go to the image output tab, I am a pretty big fan of the AOVs and all the options you have with extra image planes. Side Effects did do a really good job with that, in my opinion. So we go down here, we have all these different major categories happening. It's nice to have them laid out like that. And if we want to create really custom render variables, we can just press this plus icon down here. And then with this drop down, there's all kinds of different things you can do. This includes a cryptomat based on the object name or perhaps by material assignment. And so I really like the fact that we can mask this out with cryptomat. That's not something you always find with other render engines. More often it's becoming accepted, but it's nice to see it here with Karma because that makes a big deal within comp. If we'd like to see what these different passes look like, be sure that if you're scrolled up to the very top here, that you scroll down on this little menu and go to the icon with multiple images right here. I'm going to restart Karma, and when I do, we now have access to all these different AOVs. So that's a really handy way of seeing what these different passes are doing. You'll also notice that we have this checkbox here called Import Render Vars from Second Inputs. That's going to be this guy right here, which means that you can add additional passes and AOVs based on information from the second inputs. I'm not going to show that right now, but I just want to let you know that the second input is here to add in extra information like that. Under the filters, you'll find different denoisers. We have the NVIDIA OptX denoiser. Obviously, you need a NVIDIA graphics card to do that. And we also have an Intel OIDN. So if you want to denoise things, you can find it right there. In practice, I only recommend denoising things if you don't have the time to render or if you're just trying to light things and see what's happening very quickly. Also in our viewports, we have this enable denoising, which may or may not be available to you, but if it is, that might turn on the denoiser along here. I'm not sure how exactly to get that ungrayed out. However, that is also another place that you might find the denoising functionality. Again, I'm going to pass over some of these other settings that for right now aren't as important to understand. In this advanced tab though, if we go to driver, we can change the image mode here to buckets if you don't like the progressive style of rendering. So you can do bucket right there. This is going to enable the progressive passes. So if you want to, let's say, have one pass that's progressive and then the bucket starts, it's nice to be able to control that right here. You'll also be happy to know that if you want GI or indirect lighting, you can go to the Limits tab and turn up the diffuse limits. So this is the number of times diffuse light is going to bounce around in the scene. And we'll find options for the reflection and refraction bounces as well. If you don't have any glass or anything that requires refraction, such as this case, then it's best to set that to 0 so that you're not trying to waste rays on doing glass and things like that. However, it's nice to see that they've changed the defaults of 10 down to a more modest number of 4. that was a thing in Mantra that I always had to change. Also, we have our color limit right here. This is going to be how bright things can get. So if you're noticing fireflies, that could be potentially remedied by this color limits, or I believe it's also down here somewhere. I think it's actually in the images. If we go to filters, sample filters, color limits. So again, if you have fireflies going on, select the beauty pass and then set this limit here to something lower so that you don't have a pixel value going to 1,000 or something crazy. Now, also, if you do see fireflies, I always recommend checking out your indirect reflections, but that's just kind of a side note for right now. Anyway, what else do I want to show you? Well, if we go to mplay, I've had mixed results with using mplay on this particular version of Houdini, which again is a beta version. This is not the full-blown thing. You probably have something a bit more stable, but I've noticed some issues with mplay where if I try to maximize it and then do another frame, it kind of gets all weird. And sometimes as well, I've noticed that this errors out because the mplay log file gets corrupted. And so if you're trying to render this out, it's doing fine right now, but if I try doing multiple things in mplay, for me, this has been bugging out quite a bit lately. And for some reason, it gets really, really slow right here, probably because we forgot to turn this off, or maybe this is part of the viewport. I'm not really sure, but I found mplay to be slow and kind of buggy. So I would recommend trying to render to disk in background instead, make a separate process for that, or just to render to disk directly, as opposed to relying on mplay for your rendering tests and things like that. Also, I forgot to mention that in this bucket image mode, it's not going to actually make buckets within your viewport here. If I resume the render, it's just going to use this as a progressive. However, if it goes to actually render to disk or go to mplay, then you will see buckets. In my personal opinion, I wish I could just, see buckets in here and be able to just draw out a render region by holding shift and dragging or something like that. I know that's how a lot of other render engines work, and it's honestly something that I'm missing now that I don't have it. But anyway, that's my constructive critique when it comes to this bucket mode here. In the next video, let's see what happens when we throw a larger scene at Karma.